and welcome to Grit in the Wild podcast episode number 2. I am one of your hosts, Melissa Short.
And I'm your co host, Adam Short. And together we're here to talk about spiritual abuse, religious trauma, high control groups, toxic faith, and everything in between.
Yeah, and today we thought we'd kind of jump in and share a little more in detail our background and our story. I know in our first episode we kind of alluded to some of our background, but we're going to get more into kind of the specifics and kind of just pull back the curtain and kind of let people know where we're coming from, kind of where we got to this place we're in now.
Yeah, so a little more nitty gritty and talking about some of the good, bad, and ugly, as it were, of our stories. And this is a big step for us. This is a big step for me. I can speak for myself. I have not really shared my story publicly. Probably won't share the whole thing today, but at least kind of start getting into it. And then, of course, you're going to get to share yours too.
Yeah, we're kind of just gonna see where we go, where
See
we
where we go.
land. Yeah.
Yeah. We will it should be interesting to see how this all ends up. But yeah. So again, thanks for joining us. Hopefully you find this helpful. And again, our goal here is to just really invite you into our process. We welcome your thoughts, your connections, and comments. So thanks for being here.
Yeah. So, why don't we start with you and just kind of tell us kind of a little bit. Why don't you tell everyone just like kind of your background, like how, like what was your upbringing like, kind of how you got started in your faith journey?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up in North Carolina. And so I grew up in a, Christian household, and many people did in the 80s, the Bible Belt, as we call it. And so grew up going to church, mainly your conservative evangelical churches like Methodist, and then we switched to Presbyterian, and then we rounded it off with Lutheran at towards my high school years. So definitely got the gamut as far as your evangelical traditional church environment. So all that to say, one would think that I would not be on track to be a part of the hypercharismatic movement. So it's kind of like a twist in the story, because when I got to high school, I actually entered a pretty dark period in my life where I didn't, even though I grown up going to church, and a lot of people can probably relate to this, even if you didn't grow up in the South. I grew up going to church, but I did not really hear the gospel that I remember. And I definitely didn't understand the gospel. All I knew was you go to church. I saw people give money to the church, stand up and read off the page, sing a few hymns, go home, and that was that. And people, generally said they believe in God. You celebrate Christmas and Easter, right? And so, and I mean, it's probably more than that, but that's kind of my frame of reference for Christianity growing up. But then I entered in this dark phase of my high school years, really age 15 ish. Actually, yeah, 16. I think it really got pretty hard for me. I felt kind of not in the in crowd in high school, and I think probably a lot of people do. And so, for a variety of reasons, really kind of got in this place where I was very depressed and even suicidal. So, something that I really was wrestling with, struggling with, and I didn't really know what to do with that. I didn't know how to, handle that as a teenager, like who I talked to about this. I didn't really have anybody to talk to. Although I did go to my pastor at the Lutheran church and talk to him about certain things. But that was more later after I met the Lord. So that's kind of what set the stage for me to enter in this kind of dark period where I actually had a pretty life altering encounter with God one night. And it just to set the context a little more, I had gone to this sort of like a church camp. It was associated with the Lutheran and Methodist church, and it was more of a weekend type thing. And I actually started going to these a few times a year and really loved it. Like there was a sense of community. There's really just amazing people there, other, teenagers. And then also the leaders were awesome. And so I remember going to one of these camps one weekend. It was January of 1998. And anyway, they always would do this sort of this drama, this skit, and it was a depiction of the suffering of Jesus on the cross and kind of the gospel. And I remember watching that, and it just hit me like, it was like somebody pulled the blinders off my eyes, and I saw for the first time what Jesus did for me. And I was pretty much a wreck. I just started crying and was like was completely aware of the grace and love of God, and I understood that Jesus died for me. I was a sinner and I needed him. So that was kind of the context for what happened after that. So I went home. I was laying in my room, laying in my bed one night, or that night actually, after getting back from the camp, and right there in the middle of my room, I had this, and the only way I can explain it is this: the overwhelming presence of God came on me in a very dramatic way, and I actually could see manifestation of God in my room with my eyes open. And you have to understand, I didn't come from a charismatic background at all. Like that, I had no. It'd be like telling somebody that they can turn on the light and use electricity for the first time. They never I'd never seen it before. I'd never experienced it. Nobody ever talked about it. So I had no grid at all for any of what I was experiencing. So, and the other thing is I was by myself. Nobody was praying for me. So anyway, long story short, I had this really dramatic encounter, life altering encounter with the Lord in my room that night. God showed himself to me as being real. And that set me up for this path of the supernatural world, like a world that I knew nothing about. And I started hearing the voice of God, experiencing visions, dreams, feeling his presence in a tangible way. And it was in that context that I actually started attending Morning Star, which was not far from where I grew up in Charlotte. It used to be in Charlotte, was the main location. So I started going to Morning Star with a good friend of mine who had also had an encounter with the Lord in high school, and we would go like Friday night, sometimes Sunday mornings. And this is an environment at Morningstar where the supernatural was sort of commonplace. Like you had just incredible worship. You had people talking about prophetic words, visions, dreams. And it's like, oh my gosh, there are all these people out here who are experiencing the same thing I am. So as a teenager, that I will say to Morningstar's credit, they actually had a lot of they gave me a lot of framework to know what to do with all of this supernatural stuff that was going on. So
Yeah.
that's like the background for then what set me up for many years of a journey there.
Yeah. And then maybe you can share like kind of fast forwarding a little bit,
Yeah,
like that was your high school, and maybe sharing kind of like your transition to college and kind of a little bit about that experience too.
yeah. So kind of fast forwarding, condensing this. So during that process, I had also had another encounter with the Lord about 9 months later. This was in September of 1998, where God made it very clear to me that my calling was to do ministry. And I didn't know what that was. I had no idea what it meant to be a ministry. So, but I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that my calling was to go in the world and share the gospel with people. And I was compelled to do that. And so I was on track to become a meteorologist. You know, I said no to several scholarships at well-known universities to not pursue meteorology, and instead I went to Bible college, a Christian Bible college, and I got an education in the Bible. I got a 4-year degree in Bible and pastoral ministry, a double major. So, and what's crazy is that period of my life, that 4 years of college, was in a Christian context, is very evangelical, non-charismatic. Like I remember I had to sign a form that that said, "You agree not to speak in tongues," and basically you're basically signing away all of your charismatic beliefs or whatever. And I remember I wrote on the form First Corinthians, I think it's First Corinthians 14:39, if I remember right. Y'all you have to look it up and make sure I'm quoting that right. But I'm pretty sure that's the verse that says, "Do not forbid the speaking of tongues." It actually says that in the Bible. So I'm thinking, man, I'm here at a Bible college, and they say that the Bible's the sole like source of authority, but yet they're telling me to do something that's contrary to the Bible. So anyway, that's just something I remember sticking out. But that period of my life was a very It was very, very plain vanilla, like, you know, I think expression of Christianity was just not that exciting. I mean, I look back on it, I learned a lot, but there's a lot of things I had to unlearn too because there's a lot of theology and church history and just stuff that, I guess it matters, but at the end of the day, like, is that the kind of stuff that's going to change your life? So during my college years, I actually became exposed to the whole world of missions and started traveling internationally at that point. Developed a heart for France, started going to France every summer. And, I went to, I can't even count how many times I went to France, spent several summers there, became fluent in French, developed a real heart for the French speaking people, traveled there on a regular basis. And it was during that sort of period of my life, I got to the end of college and everybody has to decide, well, what are you going to do with your life after this? And, I decided I wanted to give my life to missions. Like I want to go out into the nations. I
Yeah.
want to I want to, propagate the gospel. And so that's kind of what I set out to do. Um, but then there's a twist in the story. I'll pause there.
You gonna pause there?
No, I'm not going to pause for good, but I'm going to pause to ask you if you have any questions so far,
Yeah, just so like,
or any comments, or should I fill in, or should I go quicker, or am I going
yeah,
too slow?
just
Okay.
making the observation, like, yeah, like, so far it's like you grew up, right, in
Mhm.
this really conservative Christian environment. You have this encounter with God that changes you. You go into a charismatic environment
Yeah.
where, there's a place for you to explore these things that are experiences that are happening to you.
Hmm.
And then you go back to, Bible college where, it's very conservative again, and you're
Yes.
not in that.
Correct.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, kind of like
Flip flop.
flip-flopped a little bit. And then
Yeah.
yeah, so like you got passionate about missions,
Hmm.
going to France. What happened next?
Yeah. So great way to segue. So I was interviewing with all these missions organizations, and they were all pretty much your conservative, well-established missions organizations that send people to the missions field for long term. Right? This isn't like a 6-week mission trip. This is like you're going to move there. And I remember praying so much about it. Like, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to go to seminary, or I'm supposed to go to the mission field, or is it something else? And I'll never forget my good friend from high school who I had pretty much sort of grown up with, for part of the time. Well, he had had an encounter with the Lord. This is the same friend I mentioned a minute ago. He had moved out to Kansas City, and he had been telling me about what he was experiencing out there. Like, there's this move of God happening out here, this amazing community. And so I remember I had a conversation with him at one point, not long, it was either right before I finished college or right after I finished college. He's like, you should come out and visit and see what we're doing out here. And just to put that in the timeline, this would have been in 1999 when IHOP started. So he actually went out there before IHOP started. I believe it was right before IHOP started, when they still had Grace Training Center, Sam Storms, Mike Bickle. I think Alan Hood taught there. So IHOP was in the process of getting, Mike Bickle was in the process of starting IHOP and spinning that off from Metro Christian Fellowship at the time. So my friend was very much involved in that, those early days of IHOP at that point. So he invited me to come out. Um, Let me actually clarify. The 99 correct time frame was when he went out there, but when I went out there, I went out to visit 2004.
Okay.
2004, went out there. So my friend had been there 5 years by that time. So IHOP had been around for 5 years. So I went out there and was exposed to a whole other movement that did have connections to Morningstar, because there are some, like Rick Joyner and Mike Bickle have been friends for many years, and there's just been kind of a cross pollination between the two organizations. So there was that history, and I had a context for Morningstar. And then, so going to Kansas City, I was exposed to a whole community of people that was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was the most, probably even to this day, honestly, like the community there was incredible. Um, a lot of the community I was exposed to was not in the immediate IHOP community, although there was some, overlap. So, and involved in the prayer room, visiting there, things like that. But immediately realized that I've got to move here. I've got to move to Kansas City. I was introduced to another organization affiliated with Metro Christian Fellowship, who that they specialized in church planting. And one thing led to another. I ended up deciding to move to Kansas City that later that year, and that's what I did. So I did their church planting program. Um, was exposed to a whole different brand, if you will, of how to plant churches, more of a house church movement. And during that 2-year process was also very much, involved in the prayer room, going to the prayer room at IHOP and being exposed to that teaching, the worship there. So it was kind of a multi-layered involvement, because even though Metro Christian Fellowship technically was not IHOP, it is the church where IHOP was spun out of. So there was
Yeah.
a lot of, as I unpack my story more, what I've learned is there are a lot of themes that if you look back to the beginning days, and even 10 years after, 10 to 15 years after Kansas City Fellowship, Kansas City Vineyard, Metro Christian Fellowship, if you look back, you see common threads and common
Yeah.
areas of unhealth, um, that at the time I was not aware that I was being immersed in.
Well, and can I ask a question about that? Because I wasn't
Yeah,
at IHOP. Like, from how you describe it, it sounds like, the prayer house or the prayer room was its own thing, and then there was
yeah.
the different fellowships. But it sounds like that community, like they were all kind of intersecting, right?
They
Like very
absolutely,
closely. Is
yes,
that kind of so? Even though
yes,
they might have been their own thing, like the
correct.
leaders and a lot of the congregants are like, there's a lot of crossover.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you, 100%. So remember, and this was back in, I was there from 2004 to 2006. So these were, I guess you could say, the earlier-ish days of IHOP. So it was still a newer organization. So a lot of the, and I've learned even later, some of the leaders in IHOP also taught in the, Grace Training Center, which then evolved to IHOP. And then also the organization I was a part of, there was crossover with Metro and IHOP. And so, even though they had different objectives, there were similar sort of roots, and, as you said, cross pollination of
Yeah.
relationships and people that kind of moved on from those groups too to create their own sort of
Okay.
churches
Yeah.
and stuff. So there was definitely, like, if you weren't directly in IHOP, you probably still knew people at IHOP, and I did. Um, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that makes sense. It's almost like if you think of a company that then gives birth to another company, and sort of like the people that came from the original company that are at the new company. I mean, you're going to have overlap. You're going to
Right.
have a thread. You're going to have some threads there, even though they have different objectives or missions or whatever it is.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think of too just a lot of the different organizations, right? Like there's like a hub and then there's yeah, all these but
Spokes.
yeah, yes,
Yeah,
like
like
similar.
sort of like, well, even Bethel. I mean, you look at Bethel.
Yes,
Bethel's
yes.
just such a huge machine. You've got all these. You got Jesus culture. You got Bethel music. You got whatever else. I can't even think of all of them right now. So yeah.
Yeah.
Um. So anyway, the point being, like, tying it back to my story, like, I'm in the middle of an amazing experience at the time, that was really, really good, actually. I don't have I actually was not abused by IHOP. So I'll just say that, like, up front. I did not experience spiritual abuse at IHOP. My spiritual abuse experience was with the organization that for now will remain unnamed, but it was an organization that I actually was sent out through as a missionary.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're fast forwarding to 2006. Okay. We're 2 years post moving to Kansas City. I, I'll skip a lot of details, but went to France as a missionary, and, um, and then shortly after that, ended up transitioning to West Africa, in the French speaking parts of West Africa, and partner with some Africans over there, an African ministry, a very well known ministry at the time there. And through a whole series of events, met these people and partnered with them along with another missionary from the United States. So we went. And our goal was to plant churches and to really, propagate the gospel and make that sort of make that happen there. So that is what began my spiritual abuse
Yeah.
was in Africa. And there's a lot, and I'm like sort of, I'm nervous to even get into this, but I don't know how much. Should I keep going? Should I pause? Do you have any questions? Or I know you've heard this story before,
Yeah.
but
Well, I think it's up to you. I think you have like
yeah,
some more time if you want to, if you feel like that's a good place to pause. But yeah, that's all kind of leading up to like the first
the
real
first,
big experience for you with spiritual abuse
yeah,
was you're sent out from this organization
hmm,
that's kind of loosely connected to IHOP,
right.
right, in Kansas
It's
City.
more than loosely.
Okay, so it's very
It's
connected. Yeah.
it's very connected. Yeah,
And you go out, you're sent out to Africa. There's another partner that you have from this organization. You guys are both there, make the connection with
yeah.
this African pastor and organizations. And this is kind of where things start to go really
South.
downhill.
I just
Yeah.
want to say this. It was more than a loose connection. The organization I was sent with or I was sent through was under the church that Mike started. So that just needs to be said. Like
Yeah.
plain and
Yeah.
simple.
No, I
Like
think
that's the
yeah.
fact of the matter. And I've actually been able to get more of the story here recently after reading Bob Scott's book. Some say they blundered. That right there will blow your mind. If you were at any point in this IHOP saga, you have to read it. Like I know anyway. So
Yeah.
I placed myself in the story on page 130. You can go look it up. And that's about all I'm gonna say about that. So I'm in Africa. I had partnered with another American missionary. We partnered with there's a whole ministry apparatus in Africa. So you had the US apparatus that I had 4 or 5 churches that formally financially supported me along with a probably 300 supporters. I was very fortunate to have a very robust and deep support team, both from a church standpoint, an individual standpoint,
Yeah.
and that was in Kansas City, that was in South Carolina, that was in North Carolina, and there might have been another one in there. I can't remember right now. Anyway, skip all that. In Africa, you have to understand that going in as a white person in Africa, I think that we unintentionally have this mindset that we're going to save the day
Mm.
as white people. And got news for you. It doesn't work that way. It's not that simple. And we white people have been trying to do that for centuries. We've been trying to bring our version of the gospel to Africa and other places too. So, there's a lot of stuff that I've had to like really think deeply about over the years. But the stuff I want to hone in on right now is these are things that I've found to be common themes across high control cult environments. Um, you are love bombed, and I experienced the love bomb. The prophetic manipulation was very very deep. This particular pastor that we worked with, in the beginning, I mean, he would go into such complex dreams and visions that he had, and he placed me and the other missionary I was working with in those stories, these prophetic, these grandiose stories that this person's going to come from the United States and they're going to be doing this and they're going to come in very specific prophetic words, visions. I was visited by the angel of the Lord, and he said that you're going to come over, and he saw all these different imageries and different this, that, and the other. And all of a sudden, you are pitched this sort of narrative, right? That you're like, oh my gosh, I'm like doing the stuff, man. I'm here. I am a brand new green behind the ears missionary, and not only am I coming here to Africa, but the pastor that I'm working with has had all these dreams and visions that he's like, I'm the guy that was called to come, and then like you hear that, and you're like, wow, no pressure,
Yeah.
like. But then you also are like, man, I'm caught up into something real big here. And
Yeah.
I have to say, looking back, that's one of the hooks for
Yeah.
these cults is I had an unhealthy need in me to be needed
Yeah.
or to have significance. It's even beyond the needing, right? It's like the significance, the desire to have a significant life and to make an impact. So,
I have a question about that.
yeah.
And like, wouldn't you say, or would you say
Mhm.
that some of that again came from some of those environments, like maybe Morning Star, where
Yes.
you're pumped full of this, right? Like influence and impact and
100%.
mission oriented, where that's expected of you. That is preached, right? As that is the gospels. You must fulfill this great
Correct.
calling. And so it primes you, would you say it primes you
Yes.
like kind of for that? And
Yes.
there was something else I
100%.
thought of too, and I don't know if you want to mention this and you
Okay.
can tell me, but in your story, I always loved when you told me this because I feel like this is really important for maybe people who are listening.
Uh-huh.
Is that part of you when you book the plane ticket
Oh,
to go? I
yes.
feel like that's an
I
important
totally
piece.
forgot about that. Thank you for reminding me. So, before I had moved to Africa, I'll never forget. I can tell you exactly where I was sitting in my car. This was back in what, 2006, where you still had to use people's Wi-Fi in public. So I was sitting in the shopping center in my car, and I was literally like praying with my laptop open, like, am I supposed to do this? Am I supposed to like book this plane ticket to Africa? Everything was lined up, everything was ready to go. They were waiting on me to book the ticket. And I go in to the website. I'm like, all right, this they I don't know if they do this anymore. But they used to call those open jaw plane tickets, and they're just one way.
Mhm.
Like you don't have a return part. Like it's just, hey, you're going from here to here, and you ain't coming back. Pack a big suitcase. And so that's and but here's the I think this is probably what you're asking me. I remember feeling the most slight, I mean the ever so slightest sort of reservation or not like it is a check. It was like a check, like, there's something quite not quite like it might be 90% yes, but there's a 10% or a 5%. I'm not so sure here. And I'm like, yeah, 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 that's just me trying to talk my way out of this. And I went ahead and did it. I booked the plane ticket. And in hindsight, if I had not booked that plane ticket, I could have avoided a lot of shipwreck and a lot of absolute destruction that happened after that. Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, because I felt like that was really important part of the story, and also just different pieces you and I have talked about in our other parts of our story where there was that slight little subtle part that
Just
was
a
like,
tiny itty
not so
bitty,
sure, but then going ahead
yeah, and
with
just
it.
overriding it.
Yeah.
And that's a super painful lesson I had to learn that I'll get into a little bit right now. So
But it wasn't like also too like this big like you were listening to God or you were just gonna do it was just really subtle.
yeah,
Like almost like you
and that's the
yeah.
part that's sort of the mystery box where, like, even in the middle of that, God takes stuff as bad as spiritual abuse and CSA, and I don't mean to, I'm not bypassing and gaslighting myself by saying this. I'm legitimately mean this. Like, he can take all of that crap and turn it into something beautiful. But man, for me, it's and there's still a lot that's unresolved with that. But anyway, so get to Africa. Remember, I've been set up to believe I'm a part of these dreams and visions. I'm the guy that's coming in partnering with the African pastor. We're going to spread the gospel to Africa. Awesome. Well, literally, I get there, and it was day one that everything hit the fan. And I realized I didn't have the language for it then that I do now, but I realized that the man that I have decided to partner with in Africa is a serial abuser
Yeah.
on multiple fronts.
Mm.
Okay. We're talking CSA and spiritual abuse. Um, I didn't witness it firsthand, but I did witness or I did hear stories of what is that called? You would know.
Assault.
Yeah, but like the physical stuff, like I'm talking about like when people hit people. Like what do you call that?
Yeah, I guess assault or
Okay.
abuse. Yeah,
So is
physical
it
violence.
domestic violence type of stuff?
Yeah.
I didn't observe it in my personal experience, but I heard of others. So we have three serious, like, Oh my gosh. I have literally come to Africa on a one-way ticket with no intention to return to the United States, and I am shoulder to shoulder with a dangerous person right now. All of the alarm bells were going off.
Wasn't there also, sorry to add to that, financial abuse from, there was an element of
Yeah,
that that I know you've shared with me.
yeah,
I don't know if you want to mention just,
yeah. Let me just I'll just unpack like what what some of this stuff entailed. So, um, the spiritual abuse, um, I still struggle to find language for this.
yeah, which is normal. Yeah.
And I've been working that this was in 2000 and frickin' 7. So it's been a minute. It's been
Yeah.
14 years and I'm still I still look back at that period of my life and it looks like a big black hairy ball. Oftentimes, like even though I worked through a lot, there's still a lot that's just there that I don't know what to do with. But anyway, the spiritual abuse took forms of um literally psychological manipulation, psychological damage, um, and some of the stuff he would do. This particular example was not directed at me, but it was at another person in the church that we planted. So, and this kind of ties back to some of the prophetic manipulation that people have experienced at IHOP and other places. Okay, so the pastor gets up.
Wait, I'm gonna pause you there. I think we should give just like a content warning, that we're gonna be
Yes,
sharing some
yes,
stories that could be very triggering and activating in regards to, right, demonic stuff
mm,
and different spiritual things. So just if you need to click off or step away, please do so. But
yeah.
just wanted to give that content warning before
Thank
you
you,
shared.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty heavy. So this one particular church service, the church we planted met in the home. So we had like a room that's like, I don't know, 30 feet by 30 feet or something. And then we could fit like probably 40 or 50 people in there. So we were in there one night or it might have been a day service. I can't remember. And there's the pastor standing up in the front and he basically, his words were this: if you do not do X, Y, and Z, I think it had to do with repenting of sin, then by next Tuesday, you're going to drop dead. Those were his words. Okay.
Huh?
And I'm in the back and I'm like, um, I know what I feel about this and it's not good, and I can only imagine what that, because it was a woman he spoke that to, an African woman. And well, I'm here to tell you that the next Tuesday, that woman died
Mm.
in the church. She didn't die in the church, but she was in the church and she died, and we were told about it. And and I to this day I don't know. Is it because the power of his words? I mean, we talk about the power of
Yeah.
our words. I mean, and there's probably a lot of superstition with that, and sort of maybe we go too far with saying our words are powerful. But I need to say it out loud. That's what happened. I
Yeah.
saw it.
Yeah.
I witnessed that. And that was an extreme example of that's like probably the most extreme example of spiritual abuse. Maybe there were more extreme, but that's the kind of person that I was working with. The other thing I want to mention is very manic depressive. So he would be either really up or really down. And after he would have these fits of rage, this pastor, I mean, he would just go into fits of rage. Um, and then after that, he would come back, quote unquote, repentant, right? So like almost like this, he felt remorse, he felt sorry that he did these things, and he would come back and he would weep like like a baby, like, and that still messes with me.
Yeah, that's part of that manipulation,
Yeah,
like the love bombing and
yeah,
they come back and they have to do it again and again, like to keep
yes.
you in that cycle of like the mind, it's really mind control.
It was
Yeah.
total mind control. Because through this, I'm thinking, well, I'm the guy I'm in the wrong here. I mean, this is the
Yeah.
man of God, right? This is the pastor who knew the president of the country and knew all the high up leaders, and we would go meet with the whoop de doo whoever's of the leading government, whatever it is. And I'm like, surely I'm the guy that has the
Mm.
problem because I'm just a little bitty whoever over here. you know, even talking about this, I'm feeling it. Like I feel the sort of the remnants of this. But there were so many incidences of that. I actually blacked it out. I don't remember a lot
Yeah.
now.
And I think we've talked about that. Like, that's if you're listening, like, that's very normal with overwhelming experiences or traumatic experiences for you to dissociate, which is really like a mental checking out that your brain and body do literally to keep you safe. It's so overwhelming to your system
Yeah.
that your brain literally, like parts of your brain go offline. And it's to protect you. It would be too overwhelming to be present in those moments. So that
Hmm.
it's a trauma response that makes sense and
Yeah.
is hard. It's really hard for, I think, I know for you to,
It's
it's hard to
very
make sense of it, right?
it's
Like when
very
that
hard.
happens.
And so what spiritually what was happening is I went into Africa with this deep prayer life. Like I was in a season with the Lord at that point in time, and a lot of this I credit to IHOP, where and I wasn't doing this because I needed to meet my hours. Like this was actual hunger and desire for God, right? Like before I went to Africa, I would spend sometimes 12 hours a day in prayer, and that's not really normal to live that way. Like, I'm not saying that's necessarily what we're shooting for in life, but that's just where I was at before I went to
Yeah.
Africa. So my escape hatch was twofold. I would either go to my room to go try to hear God, but I felt like my ability to hear the voice of the Lord was like so damaged. I couldn't find him. He just felt nowhere to be found. That was one way I did it. Another way I would leave the house and go to the beach and just try to get some respite, because I was afraid of him. Like he was a scary person. And so those were kind of the relief hatches that I looked towards, and then also like calling back to the United States and talking to some trusted people, describing to them what was going on,
Yeah.
and they kept telling me over and over, "You've got to get out of there. You've got to come back. You've got to come home." So, that just kind of continued for, over and over on a daily basis,
Can
for a
we
long
talk
period of time.
can we pause there and talk about that for a minute? Like, I'd love
Okay.
you to share for people who are listening because so many people say they hear these stories, right? And they're like, well, why didn't you just leave? Like, I
Okay.
wonder if you could share a little bit about what
Yes.
that felt for you to think about leaving. Like, what were some of your thought processes? What were your emotions when you would think, like, hear what these people were saying that you trusted? Share a little bit about that, if that feels okay to share.
Yeah, so the crazy thing is, I'm supposed to be this free agent, right, who's coming in as a missionary, but I was increasingly under the control of this pastor. And by control, I mean literally down to micromanaging everything. Like literally, you can't leave the house unless it's such and such time of day.
Yeah.
You can't walk to this, and the way it was pitched was, I'm just looking out for your safety.
Yeah.
A white person should not be walking by himself to such and such. And maybe you know what? Maybe there were, to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe there was some honest. He was trying to look out. But the level of this was hyper control down to the nth degree. And if you did not comply, there were consequences. There was rage, there
Mm,
was yelling, there was spiritual beration, if that's even a word. And then there were the social impacts, right? Where, you know, you were he was going around to all the different people and sliming your name through the mud because you're not submitting to the man of God. So, with your question, like, why didn't you leave sooner? Like, I didn't have a prison around me, but I felt like I did.
yeah.
So it's not like you just say, "Hey, peace out, bro. I'm gone." Like it's you actually felt like you had a prison around you,
Yeah, it's part
like
of that,
physically.
thinking about trauma responses, there's like a freeze response where you're you're frozen like in fear and
Yes.
terror and
100.
helplessness. And it's again, it's not that you're physically confined, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually, right?
You
There's a
are.
sense of like, I'm trapped, right?
You
I
are.
can't get out.
I will say what came to mind when you said that is a scene from, I believe it was the documentary 7M. Remember we watched
Oh yeah, yeah,
7M?
yeah. That's a good cult
Yeah,
documentary.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
A cult documentary called 7M, I think it was. And one of the victims and survivors of that situation, there was a scene where she had privately and secretly arranged for somebody to come pick her up to exfiltrate her from that unbelievable, horrific experience that she
Yeah.
was going through. And I won't go into detail right now, but you can watch it. It is very graphic and very hard to watch. But the camera shows her apartment, and then it's looking out to the driveway, to the street, and there's
Yeah.
somebody in a car, a trusted friend in the car, waiting for her, and they had coordinated a specific time when the abuser was not going to be there to make her escape. Do you remember this?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I was watching this scene when we watched this, and I'm like, I am reliving what I felt in Africa.
Yeah.
I all I could think about is, please God, get me out of here. Like I've got to find myself a plane ticket to get myself out of here and hope to God I can get to the airport without him physically restraining me.
Yeah.
So the distance between the door and the car felt like a million miles.
I bet.
For me, the
Yeah.
distance between our house and the airport, even though it was a 15-minute drive, felt like an absolute eternity.
Mm.
So I understand what it feels like when a survivor and a victim, you you can't get out. It feels like you can't get out. Even
Yeah.
right now as I'm talking about it, I still feel it.
Yeah. Makes so much sense. And like, I know I was thinking back to the scene in the movie, and as I'm hearing you talk about like right from the outside in, it looks so easy, like just call a friend and come get you. But it's
Yeah.
like that internal like turmoil that yeah keeps you feeling trapped and stuck like you can't.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's a lot more that I could say, maybe I will say in the future about the Africa story. There's a lot there that happened. Just just that's only a very fractional piece. But I just, I want to hone in on the feeling of being trapped. And then maybe next time, maybe I'll mention this just shortly because I know you want to share too.
Well, maybe I just think you should share.
You
I
do?
think you should take the time to share. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Um, yeah, so I guess what I was going to say is sort of the part two other layer of this is the negligence and failure of the organization
Mhm.
here in the United States. And the leaders of that organization in Kansas City, it was, I mean, it was as if I didn't exist anymore.
Mm.
They begged and pleaded or begged and pled. I'm not sure the past tense of pled is pleaded, pleaded. They pleaded, begged and pleaded that I would come to Kansas City to meet with the pastor. Because, by the way, he came back to the United States. He married the friend that I was partnering with, and they went back to the United States and they got married. And so he was there. He was in Kansas City, and he proceeded to basically slander me through the mud and discredit me. And they wanted me to come back and meet with him and face him. And I said, absolutely not. I'm not coming back. I've never gone back to Kansas City, and I won't, unless it's to see the Chiefs game. I'd be happy to go see the Chiefs. But no. Yeah, it was just all left. It was never resolved. None of this was resolved. So I was left picking up the pieces, and all the people in the church as well. And man, it's been quite the journey. I have to say that I do not have any of this figured out. I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about working through pain and trauma, but there's still a lot there. There's
Yeah.
probably a lot there that I still have to work through. But that's really kind of the Africa chapter of my story. That's I'm leaving out a lot, but that's kind of like a good overview
Yeah.
of Africa.
Golly, and
So
I'm thinking, thank you for sharing all that. I know that was a lot for you to share, and I'm just, as your wife, really proud of you
thank
for
you.
feeling a little emotional. Proud of you for sharing that. And I'm sure that that's going to help somebody. I hope it does, knowing that you're not alone if you've experienced something like that. But
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, as when I'm thinking about all that you shared, um, it just makes me think of, again, like with all the things we've seen come out to how ill equipped we are
yeah,
with training on how to handle things like this and how we don't believe victims. Like,
yeah,
there's such a commonality of like, we automatically assume that the leaders are the ones in the right and don't hear the cries of the people who are being abused.
yes,
They're dismissed and just, being, like you said, just being left with the pieces
yeah,
without support. And that's really like, again, like always bring up trauma stuff, but like
hmm,
what makes the difference between something becoming traumatizing and not? Because we all can go through traumas.
yeah,
It's the lack of support through it. And so hearing, like, my heart hurts knowing that like that organization could have helped you come through that, like that was supposed to be supporting you. Like if they
hmm,
were better equipped and people better understood these things, we'd be able to
yes,
support victims to actually come through instead of being left on your own,
left for
right?
dead,
To
left for
just
yeah,
pick up the mess and pick up the pieces of your life again after something so horrific.
yeah, yeah. I mean the fallout from something like this is so large, and this is only my story. I don't know what
Yeah.
other stories are in those. I have reconnected recently with one person in Africa, or who was in Africa, to hear their story, as well, which was healing for him and myself, I think. But yeah, it's you're left with the pieces, man. Like,
Mm.
and I think unfortunately, like, to their credit, a lot of these, I would say, I still have a shred of faith, maybe hope, that these leaders in these organizations are largely, or oftentimes, are sincere. Maybe
Yeah.
they're sincere, but they're unfortunately sincerely wrong.
Yeah.
Right? They're sincerely wrong. They're ill equipped, like you said. So all the more reason we need to talk about this. We
Yeah.
need to bring awareness to spiritual abuse is still a very new
Yeah.
concept. Like, I think more people are aware of it now, but like it's a thing. It's a real thing. And it's it is detrimental. It is a
Yeah.
very, very high impact experience to go through. Even if you think that it's not significant. And I've told myself that for years, like, well, even over the past year, like with the IOP KC thing, I've told myself, well, you haven't gone through much. I mean, you're just, nothing burger compared to all the other people. And yeah, maybe mine is not as impactful as some others, right? But I just want to make the point that just because it may have just been spiritual abuse and not something else doesn't mean it's less
Right.
impactful,
Yeah.
because the impact is determined by the person that's impacted.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's not determined by the person out there who is sort of a third party observer,
Right.
you know?
And it's like it doesn't work like that. It would be nice if we, and I think we do that unintentionally. We're like, oh, well, it really wasn't that bad. So I shouldn't feel this way. I need to just get past this. I need
Yeah.
to get over it. And I,
Yes.
I think there's, like you're saying, like talking about this, there's so many people out there that have probably experienced spiritual abuse, but just like you said, kind of just try to talk themselves out of their experience and just
Hmm.
move on. Because, right, they're kind of told to do that in a lot of places. But
Yeah.
but yet they're actually not able to move on. Like
Yeah.
it's a nice idea, like leave the past in the past, but
Right.
the past continues to follow you until you process it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think you're right on with that. And
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah. I don't recommend spiritual abuse. It's not fun.
no,
But I mean, there are some lessons to learn in it, that hopefully, we can share some stuff that helps you. If you've been through something like that, like, just know that there is a way through it, and there are people that care.
Yeah.
There are people that care, that are out there, who want to help, who want to hold space for you. They want to listen. Not everybody, and that's one thing I've had to like really backpedal from is like for a long time I still struggle with this. I don't trust people like I used to. I'm pretty cynical. When I see a stranger, they act nice, like I'm kind of like, who are you? And I mean, some of that's probably healthy, right? You shouldn't probably trust everybody with
Yeah.
your pearls, but still, it's just one of the effects that can happen with this stuff. Like your ability to sort of be out there and let your heart be open to people has been damaged.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's hard when it's happened multiple times too. Like, and not to negate the one time is really hard, but it's like you think about, I know just like our story and your story in particular, you went through that. That's just one part. Like Adam is only sharing one part of his spiritual abuse. There's other parts to it that will unpack over time, but like
yeah,
to go through that like that and then heal and then get back up and then go through it again and again,
hmm
it does something to
it's
you.
excruciating.
It
It's
is. And it
scarring.
changes.
It's scarring. It does
Yeah.
change you,
Yeah.
even if, and I think Bob Scott, described it this way in his book. Some say they blundered, which I highly recommend. I think he said something to the effect of, you're walking around with scar tissue, or he
Mm,
he walked around with scar tissue for what, 20 years, because he had warned people way back in the 90s about this, about Mike and the bad stuff going on, and he's like, okay, here I am, 2023, 2024. I'm going to write my story. It's like yanking the scars off.
yeah.
Um, but it's part of it. And I found, this is so healing, just being able to share.
I'm so
And
glad. Yeah.
so thank y'all for listening and holding space.
Yeah. I thought of something as you said about the scars, and it's kind of cheesy, but I love it actually. And it's this, I don't know who said it or what quote, but they said the resurrected Jesus had scars. And I think that's really important. Like, again, as navigating our faith, this idea that, yeah, the resurrected Christ, the risen Christ, he didn't come back without scars. Like,
Mm.
his scars remained. And so, perfection, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I guess I'm trying to say that, like, yeah, just because we can heal, but we still carry the scars with us, that it doesn't look like this perfect
Like it
thing.
never
Like,
was.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I
Mm.
find that encouraging that it doesn't have to, we have this idea that I'll never be affected if I'm healed. But the
Yeah.
truth is, like, the scars become part of our story. It doesn't have to own us, but I think it does become part, just like it did with Jesus.
That's
Hope
good.
that's not like cheesy, but
Yeah, no, I get what you're
yeah.
saying. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, shall we wrap?
yeah, we appreciate you guys listening. And again, we would love to hear from you and
Yeah.
just share in the comments, reach out to us through email. What is it? Grit in the wild
Yep.
at gmail
Dot
dot com
com.
if you want to email us, and we will do our best to get back to you as soon as we can.
Yep.
And
Thank
yep,
y'all again so much for being here and hope to hear from you. Take care.
bye.
Bye.